November is Hip Hop History Month. After celebrating hip hop's 50th anniversary this year, we have created our new hip hop collection to showcase the history and culture of hip hop with pictures, videos, conversations, and more. Visit digitalarchives.queenslibrary.org to explore QPL's hip hop collection, and be sure to visit queenslibrary.org to check out our hip hop programs in November. Queens Public Library is proud to participate in this year's New York Cares Coat Drive. This citywide initiative aims to collect over 100,000 coats and distribute them to New Yorkers who need them the most this winter. You can donate new and gently used winter coats for children and adults at 14 QPL locations from November 1st through December 31st during our regular hours of service. Visit queenslibrary.org to learn more. Let's have some Thanksgiving fun at the library. Join us in the days leading up to the holiday for arts and crafts, concerts, movies, and more. Visit the QPL calendar at queenslibrary.org to see all our virtual and in-person Thanksgiving programs.
Welcome to Queens Public Library's talk with Radhi Bagawa, co-director of the documentary feature Have You Got It Yet? The Story of Syd Barrett and Pink Floyd, and Orion Williams, co-producer of the feature. Film Inquiry states, if you are a fan of Pink Floyd or music from the acid days of the 60s, then this film is a must-watch. The New York Times declares it's as comprehensive and coherent an account of Barrett's counterculture tragedy as one could hope for. Variety writes, the story is familiar, but it's never been told in such detail. Hi, I'm Brian Alessandro. I have written for Interview Magazine, Newsday, Pank, Huffington Post, Lambda Literary, The Gay and Lesbian Review, and I've recently co-adapted Edmund White's A Boy's Own Story into a graphic novel for Top Shelf Productions. Additionally, I co-edited Fever Spores, The Queer Reclamation of William S. Burroughs, an anthology of essays and interviews about Burroughs for Rebel Satori Press. I'm also the co-founder and editor-in-chief of the literary journal, The New Engagement. My first novel, The Unmentionable Mon, was published in 2015 by Cairn Press, and my first feature film, Afghan Hound, was produced by Marriott Media in 2011. It is currently streaming on Plex, Tubi, and Amazon. My new novel, Performer Non Grata, was released in April by Rebel Satori Press. Culture Connection, curated by Daniel Zaleski and now in its 10th year at the Queens Public Library, is proud to present international artists from emerging talent to award-winning masters. These disciplines include music, theater, author talks, and film. Now expanding into a virtual format, Culture Connection is currently reaching a global audience. Award-winning director Radhi Bagawa's work is known for its investigation of history and culture via lyrical lo-fi means and innovative narrative structures. He has made 5 feature films, I Was Born But in 2004, Junk in 1999, and Some Divine Wind in 1991, and his most recent film, Taken by Storm, The Art of Storm Thorgerson and Hypnosis in 2015, about the work of prolific record cover designer Strom Thorgerson, noted for the iconic Dark Side of the Moon, Pink Floyd, and Houses of the Holy, Led Zeppelin, among hundreds more. And more recently, obviously, Have You Got It Yet? The Story of Syd Barrett and Pink Floyd, the nature of tonight's program. He has also made numerous short films and videos. Radhi studied art and played in punk bands before turning to filmmaking, receiving his MFA degree from the University of California at San Diego, where he made his first 2 short films, which have screened extensively in festivals, museums, and national and international art galleries. Producer Orion Williams first burst onto the scene with the Academy Award-nominated film Shadow of the Vampire, a personal favorite of mine, which he produced alongside Nicolas Cage. His next venture was the BAFTA and Cannes-winning film Control, another favorite of mine, directed by Anton Corbijn, and which delved into the life and legacy of Ian Curtis, of course, of Joy Division. And in addition to this, he also produced the documentary One Fast Move or I'm Gone, Kerouac's Big Sur, which he transformed into a feature film, Big Sur, premiering at the Sundance Film Festival in 2013. Orion's upcoming projects include a biographical film on Jeff Buckley, starring Reeve Carney, marking his directorial debut. Also in collaboration with Danny Boyle, the great Danny Boyle, he produced a film about the Scottish manager Alan McGee, who discovered Oasis, titled Creation Stories. Orion also executive produced Roving Women with Wim Wenders, which will be released soon. Thank you both so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you. Wow, we sound very cool.
You guys are very cool, and we're honored to have you both here at the same time to talk about this awesome film of yours. So I have to ask you, we were talking a little bit before the live stream started about the origins of this particular documentary. So what brought you both to Pink Floyd and specifically to Syd Barrett's story?
Yeah, I mean, I had we only have an hour, so we can't tell the whole story. But
right.
I had done this film on Storm Thorgerson, which the first screening was at South by Southwest in 2011. And I didn't know Storm. I knew his designs, certainly as a teenager. And a friend of mine who's a musician, Chris Brokaw, who's actually playing in New York next week, I think, at Bowery Ballroom with Codeine. He was very good friends with Storm's illustrator, and he came through New York and he told me, "Oh, I was just at Storm Thorgerson's studio," and I had no clue who that was at all. And my joke to him was, is this some Finnish death metal singer that I don't know of? And he said, no, they had the company Hypnosis in the 60s and 70s, did record cover designs. So, oh, yeah, of course I know that. And so I ended up writing Storm, and it was a 2.5 year long adventure, which was kind of crazy. But Storm and I became very, very close during this time. And we were screening the film in Los Angeles at an event at Soho House. And the next day, Rob Dickinson, who's in the band Catherine Wheel, said to Storm, he lives in LA, he said, "Storm, Roddy should do the film about Syd Barrett that hasn't been done, the proper film." And Storm, over toast and eggs, looked at me and he said, "What do you know about Syd Barrett, Roddy? What could you possibly know?" And I told him the story about how I was in a band in college, and the bass player of the band loved the first Pink Floyd record, The Piper at the Gates of Dawn. Mm-hmm. And we would try and learn songs from it, but we could never figure them out because they were so peculiar. So I said to Storm, I said, so Storm, my first thing I think about with Syd is like how I couldn't play his songs. So finding the limitations of my musicianship. But then I told him that, I loved Syd's lyrics, the solo records, Madcap Laughs and Barrett, and how beautiful and poetic they were. And Storm said, "Oh, maybe you are the one." And so, he said, if you want to do a film about Syd, I grew up with everybody. I grew up with Syd. I grew up with Roger Waters. I grew up with David Gilmour. I know everyone. I'll produce the film. You can direct it. And then, in a classic sort of Storm way, one day my phone rang and it was Storm, and he said, "Roddy, where are you?" And I said, "I'm in New York, Storm." And he said, "Well, I'm in Los Angeles. We're starting the Syd film. Are you coming?" And I said, "Well, Storm, I can't jump on a plane right now." But what I didn't know at the time, Storm had colon cancer that had gone into remission and had come back. And so essentially, he started doing some of the interviews himself. We did craft the list of interview people we wanted to talk to. We crafted the questions together, but he basically started doing some of the interviews, and he would show up and say, "I'm doing this film. Roddy Bagawa is the director. I don't know where he is. He could be in Hawaii. He could be in Europe. He could be New York. So I'm doing the interview, but here I am, and I'm sick." And so, that was another big emotional component to the film. I mean, something that I think makes our film quite unique, which is that, Storm was using the film to say goodbye to a lot of his friends, and so, it was quite powerful. And so, that's how it kind of started, and I think in some ways, Storm, we enjoyed each other so much that this was another way to kind of intertwine our lives for longer, years and years after, which is something like he would be, definitely manicuring to set up.
Right, right. It's a very profound and poignant origin story. He ended up passing away, Roddy, in 2013. Is that right?
He passed in 2013, about almost a year after we started officially kind of the film. Orion and I met because big fan of the work he had done. And, Control, I think, is always one of the films I pull off my shelf to watch periodically, to think about how you could do kind of, portrait film, beautiful kind of poetic thing. And I was kind of on the tail end of the film on Storm, and I got a call from Jenny Spires, who was one of Sid's ex-girlfriends, and said, "There's this producer in LA who's doing a film about Sid." And I said, "What?" And she said, "Yes, his name's Orion Williams." And I called an old friend of mine who lives in LA, and I literally said, "Look, man, if there's one thing you can do, you can get me an email by the end of the day for this producer named Orion Williams." And he came through in a couple of hours, and I shot a cold email to Orion. I said, and I lied. I said, "I got your email through this guy, but I'm going to be in LA. I'd love to meet with you and talk to you. I'm working on a Syd Barrett film, and I've done this film." And so Orion and I got together, and, we in LA, and we just hit it off. We realized we had so many shared loves, being music, photography, film, and art, and a lot of the same bands we really, grew up with. And so, I said, "Listen, can you help me on this?" And so, that was the start of our friendship too, for sure.
So Orion, you never really get a chance to meet Storm then, right?
I did not, no.
Okay. What was it like for you coming into this project about a year and change at this point after they had started shooting?
Well, it's funny. My story kind of starts from when I was younger, just falling in love with musicians and music from the UK. And, not being a musician myself like Roddy, I had no sort of ambition to be in a band. It would have been cool to be on stage, but that's a different story. It was just really, for me, it became about the aesthetic of the band, the portrait that represented them on the album cover, or who directed the video. How did that band come together? And I always thought that was fascinating. And there were some, in Houston, there was an enclave of some really interesting people that were all sort of into the same types of music that I was into, which was kind of off kilter, new wave, if you want to call it. I grew up in the 80s, but then I moved to LA, and then once I made the Joy Division film, I was really a recipient to anything that came to me that felt like it could connect in that similar way. I was getting a lot of offers to do different types of music biopics, if you want to call them. But the thing about Pink Floyd for me is they were always this big band that had Roger Waters and David Gilmour in it, and the other guys as well. I just didn't know much about them. And my older friends were zoning out to Pink Floyd. Of course, Syd Barrett was always a name that, recalled some sort of question about who is that guy. So when Roddy got in touch, it just seemed like, wow, oh my gosh, that's like, to me, the coolest, exploration of the mind you can get into, using music and image at the same time. And that's how
Keep going.
No, it's okay.
Just to that point, as I was watching the film, my background's in clinical psychology. I was like, wow, this is a really thorough, rigorous sort of psychological examination of a man. Yes, on the one hand, of a single person, but also of the myths that we'd like to make in popular culture. And I think particularly in musical lore. And he's one of the great, I think, enigmas of the past century. Syd Barrett, right? Who is Syd Barrett? And your film, I think, starts with that question and does a really rigorous job of really attempting to mine something throughout, with a sense of compassion and curiosity. He died at the age of 60 in 2006, right? What is the consensus on Barrett's contribution to Pink Floyd? Generally, what's understood at this point? I mean, if we had to, for people who are coming to this interview cold and they don't know much about Pink Floyd, what would you say? Both of you.
Well, I think, the band, and Roger Waters says this in the film, they wouldn't have existed without Syd Barrett. You know, he was the founder that named the group. He wrote the 2 first hit singles. So he wrote Arnold Lane and See Emily Play, which is, you know, their charting singles, which basically started them on their way, and wrote most of the songs, I think almost all the songs on the first record, and had a couple of tracks on the second album, Saucerful of Secrets. So I think he really was the, you know, he was the front man and the singer. And so he started the band off in this very, you know, I think unique way. I mean, even if you look at the other sort of quote unquote psychedelic bands from that era, Pink Floyd was certainly out there in certain ways. And so I think his personality, and Roger says this really interesting thing, that he was the most curious person that he had known. So, you know, I think there was this whole thing about exploration of, you know, there's stories about how he would make up guitar chords by just the shapes of his hand and things like that. So he kind of approached, I think, music in a very interesting way, which I think did set Pink Floyd kind of apart from a lot of the groups then. Certainly most fans that think of Pink Floyd, they think of Dark Side of the Moon, which has had its massive 50th anniversary just, you know, in the last few months. So it's all over. And, you know, of course, that's one of the, you know, best records ever made of all time. So, you know, it's warranted. So it's interesting because I think there are some people that think that there's, you know, the early Pink Floyd, and then, you know, the sort of the middle period. And then when Roger starts sort of doing more of the songwriting, and then now David's, you know, Pink Floyd version. And I always think of them kind of interesting, like as a continuous arc in some interesting way, you know, how they shifted and changed. I mean, there's not a lot of bands, I think, that have done that, you know, that have shifted in terms of who is the most creative central person and continued with a certain sound. So I think he was key. And as you mentioned, and I think, you know, this is also Orion and I, you know, part of our interest, you know, this figure, this iconic character that is in some ways a common story, I think, you know, in music. Certainly there's Brian Jones from the Stones and Brian Wilson, Roky Erickson, you know, I always say this, I always think even of Kurt Cobain, you know, this idea of someone that finds a creative outlet, you know, to express what's inside them. And then all these things kind of come around them that create a pressurized situation. And you know, and so it's there's a certain pathos in that, you know, I think, and certainly Ian Curtis was a figure that had that situation.
For sure. So he also, you know, talk to me a little bit about how he was an artist and a recluse. Do you think it's necessary, or do you think he thought it was necessary that in order to create great art, he had to withdraw? Is that what eventually led to this sort of hermitage?
I think, well, you know, one of the things in our film that we talked a lot about was that, in fact, there's not really, you know, an exact, you know, reason where, you know, that there's different, you know, we thought it was important to present different perspectives and leave it open-ended and not connect all the dots. You know, that was something that always drove us, which I think people are really appreciating, you know, as a more complicated portrait of somebody, you know, that you don't wrap it all up, you don't tie it, you don't explain it. And we realized, you know, from doing the interviews that we didn't. So it would not be actually an honest kind of thing. It might be a more dramatic film to do that. But in fact, one of the things that we thought a lot about was to keep it open-ended. And so no one really knows for sure, you know, exactly what that was. I mean, there is a feeling though that that I came away with personally. I don't, Orion might feel the same way, which is that I think at a certain point it became hard work. Whereas I think initially it was about his creativity and experimentation, and it was really easy. And he had an inner muse that drove him. But when you look at, you know, the bands around that time, you know, and you look at their tour schedules and, you know, having to go on television, I think it just became really like tiring and exhausting. And maybe that kind of, as it happens with creative types, it becomes about work, and it's no longer the moment of creation or the process of creation.
Was that, Orion, from the jump, was that a conscious decision that you all made to approach this kind of cubistically, or is it something that happened in the process of making the film, to take this sort of I like to use the term cubistic, where you're looking at something from multiple points of view without landing anywhere decisively in terms of a reason or a cause?
I think that through the process with Roddy and our editor Karen Skloss, who was fantastic and worked on a documentary about Townes Van Zandt. Roddy had met her through a friend and discovered her and worked with her. I think the film evolved in a way that we had no understanding of how it was going to end up. When we started it, I mean, this was just non-finance. We had no support from the band yet. We had Storm. And, Roddy was on the ground way earlier than I was, but having heard and done a lot of these things, which, you hear the story, but I think, to answer your question, I think it was always a new layer, something that we would discover through an interview, through people that we would meet. I mean, I'll use this story as an example, which ties on a little bit, is that, we didn't know that Pete Townsend was a fan of Pink Floyd. It's one of his favorite bands. In fact, it inspired him to do what he does. And I'm working with him on another project. We were having lunch. It's a really interesting story, but in brief, he just said, "I can't believe I'm not in your Pink Floyd film." And it's like, wait, where did this come from? How do we? And just kind of picked a sort of a title of what this film is. We wouldn't have been open to other things and receptive to some conversations which eventually took the film to another place. Pete came over, Roddy flew in from New York in my apartment, and we sat there for, 4 hours, and it really touched on something much more deep and emotional. And I think Sid, did that for a lot of people. He was obviously not just a musician; he was something greater than that. But I don't know, Roddy, does that kind of answer a little bit?
Yeah, no, and I think there was two things I would say quickly. I mean, I told Storm, initially when he said, "Let's, do you want to do a film about Syd Barrett?" I said, "Storm, I love you, but I need 2 months off from you, and I have to think about this." And when I came back to him, I said, I'll only do it. I think there's a dramatic premise in this story that nobody knows really what happened. And I'm as a film director, I'm interested in that. But I'll only do it if we do it as an intimate portrait. I have no interest in doing it as a straight documentary. It's got to be really from the inside out. So that was one thing. And then the other thing is, just by the way the film went, like Orion's mentioning, it took over 10 years to get the thing done, which some people are horrified by that. And if I think about it for 5 seconds, I'm a little bit horrified by it. But, literally, I think over that time period, the film shaped itself in certain ways. And like Orion mentioned, Pete came in very late. We were almost done with the film. And, at one point we were trying to get David Bowie before he passed away, as like a first person kind of, account of what Syd was like to see live. And then all of a sudden Pete says, "I was there at the UFO Club with Eric Clapton. I want to tell what it was like to see him." And so it was like really fortuitous. And, and we got the rings from, Syd's fiance. She mailed them to us in the mail, the actual rings.
Wow.
Pretty late in the film. And then, I got the interview. I interviewed his sister, which was also very late. Storm had passed away by that time. And so I was able to get an interview with Rosemary Breen. And then the big thing is that, when you're talking about mythical stories, is those photos of Syd at Abbey Road from Phil Taylor came almost at the very end. I'd read a story that it was a little line in one of the biographies that it said Phil Taylor had a camera, and I know Phil, and he's a sweetheart, and I kept writing him and calling him, and he was being very, very cagey. And then finally, after about the 8th time I talked to him, he said, "Yes, it's true, Roddy. I had a camera." And I said, okay, well, and and then he would show me photos like on Zoom, like at an off angle on his laptop, and like, he was like, I don't know what, and I was, and so it took quite a long time, but then he said, this is the film, okay. This is the one I'll do it. And he'd been sitting on those photos. Nobody's seen those photos. He'd been sitting on them since 1976 or whatever.
And these are the ones that we have in our slideshow that we're going to look at in a little while, I believe, right, Roddy?
Oh, I'm not sure.
We'll take a look in a moment. But
yeah,
Orion, you said something a minute ago about how Roger Syd, right? It's Roger Syd Barrett, how he was really a multifaceted artist. I mean, he was a painter. He was drawn to the beat poets. Can you talk to us a little bit about what his youth was like and how maybe his childhood helped inform his inspiration or his creativity, his artistic trajectory?
It's a great question. I mean, none of us were unfortunately there to really get to know him. And I think through our film, I got to know him. And through the people that were there, were also, Roddy, they were kind of, at times they were like not willing to open up as much as probably even they could. And I think we got, a big sense of who he is through the wonderful path that we took to tell his story through this film. It's all the people that were as close as possible to him. And they still have questions and they still don't know. And I think that's pretty miraculous that, I talk about my friends like I know them and I talk about them all the time. But then what if you didn't really know them? And you're like, well,
right.
They're doing something on their own that's taking this whole thing. People never really assumed that a guy from Texas was going to go out and make movies about Joy Division. I never saw it. Never had a chance to do that. And I think Roddy and I, we clearly bonded over something with an aesthetic that, made sense for the film. But sure. It's hard to say. I don't know what he was like as a child. I think just from the images, you see someone that a lot of people, and I've done a lot of these movies about young English musicians wanting to escape. They all wanted to get out of there. They wanted to go to America. It seems like most of them did. And that first shot at going to the U.S. on tour was the Holy Grail. It was the moment,
And I wanted to ask about that too. The band Pink Floyd, right, became Nick Mason on drums, Roger Waters on bass guitar and vocals, Richard Wright on keyboard and vocals, with Barrett on lead vocals and guitar. Can you talk to us a little bit about what that first year was like for them as a band?
I think it's kind of amazing when you think about how really Syd was in the band for only 3 years, basically. Right. From when they first began to, and incredibly busy, like, to have 2 charting singles and record a full LP, and then tour as much as they did. So, there's in the biographies, there's a few books that show their tour schedule, and it's just incredible. Some months are playing 2 shows a day. So it's incredibly amazing how fast they catapulted. And I think part of it was Syd kind of being, this character that was kind of the epicenter in certain ways. I think, Mark Bolan comes after that. Bowie comes after that. But Syd was kind of, maybe Jimi Hendrix were like kind of the 2, figures within that. So it was really, fast year. And I would just say, to tag on to what Ori was saying, I think a lot of the musicians, and British musicians in particular, that are in the film and also friends of ours, had very similar experiences where they were in art school and a lot of them were painters. Yeah. And then they just happened to be in a pop band, and all of a sudden the pop band takes off.
I once read Tom York of Radiohead once said that if he had his druthers, or if he had a different trajectory in life, he would want to make films like Stanley Kubrick. He was very specific about that. It's cool. And Kubrick is my favorite filmmaker, so I remember that quote. But the Pink Floyd sound was the original name that Barrett had given the band, right? And what was the inspiration for that name? And were there other names that were bandied about?
Well, the famous story is that they, I forget which, they had all these iterations of different names, but I forget which last name it was, but they showed up at a gig and the band had the same name. And so, like, out of pulling it out of a hat, Sid said, we're the Pink Floyd sound, Pink being from Pink Anderson and Floyd being from Floyd Council, who were two kind of blues players. Like he had those blues records. So he just combined those names and, said, oh, the Pink Floyd sound. But, but everyone was always like, what, have no clue what that meant. The whole thing with Pink Floyd, which one's pink, all this sort of stuff, mythology that grew from that. But, I think in certain ways he just, pulled a rabbit out of the hat and said, that's our name.
And it stuck, and it certainly worked.
Yeah.
Let's take a minute and take a look at the trailer for your film.
Sid defined the whole of that moment in the 60s.
The story was always, oh, he went mad and left the group.
They were so totally and unbelievably original. He launched them into space. At that time, everybody was dropping acid in London.
But not everybody was dropping acid like he was.
But he wasn't the only one.
There are some people who must have a weakness of some sort, like a switch waiting to be turned, and that switch will go and they'll never quite come back.
And the band went on being more and more successful. And where was Sid?
He decided that he no longer wanted to be a pop star.
I suppose what is sad is about somebody who was still extremely relevant just decides to stop.
Really fantastic. Please tell us about some of the other great artists that you interviewed for the film. You had Tom Stoppard, Pete Townsend, Roger Waters, Nick Mason. Who else? And friends also, and ex-lovers, right? People who aren't famous.
Yeah, I mean the four main girlfriends: Jenny Spires, Libby Gowsden, Gayla Pinion, and Lindsay Corner, which were the four main girlfriends. The two original Pink Floyd managers, Peter Jenner and Andrew King, Peter Wynne Wilson, who did the light shows. It was pretty close to Sid at some point. So people are sort of around the band, but then also his art teacher. We tracked down his art teacher, people that were in art school with him, Maggie Hambling, who's a pretty famous British artist. Some of the childhood friends, Andrew Rawlinson and these people, we had a big list, and some people didn't make it. I mean, in terms of the celebrity, other people, I mean, we interviewed Graham Coxon from Blur, Andrew Van Wijngaarden from MGMT, Cedric Bixler-Zavala from the Mars Volta, certain amount of musicians, and Pete Townsend. Came in. So
was everyone you approached, were they eager to talk? Was there anyone who felt reluctant?
No, I think probably more people wanted to talk to us than we could do. We're still getting messages. Why didn't you interview me?
Oh no.
So I think it's an interesting thing, but at a certain point, like, you just have to kind of stop. I mean, we had so much material. And then eventually, and this is the editing process that Karen's, as already mentioned, Karen Skloss is an amazing editor. She worked on my film with Storm. We just sort of started deciding different sequences and directions around that. There was nobody that I think we approached to interview that didn't, other than that I was trying to get to Bowie before he passed away, and nobody knew he was sick then.
Right.
He was doing Black Star secretly.
Right.
And I had heard through the grapevine that he was interested in doing it, but then he was too busy. And then, like, in hindsight, we know why. It was all of a sudden, that came out very fast in terms of that.
There's another voice in the film that came about sort of with Roddy and I just throwing names around, was the guy that does the narration, which is Jason Isaacs. you know, he's not being interviewed, but his voice adds a whole nother layer of character, I guess I would say. He's from, you know, Harry Potter and Black Hawk Down and a million movies.
Yeah, sure.
And he was a friend, and it was sort of just luck, I think, Roddy. I wasn't there on the day that Roddy recorded his voiceover, but because it was in London and I was in Mississippi or something, but he kind of was in 10 minutes like, yes. And it was a text and he did it. And he went there, and Roddy, I guess that added another layer of, I don't know, emotion to the film, really.
Yeah. I mean, he was amazing. It was really, you know, at one point there was a scratch track that was my voice, which didn't quite work with my California twang. And then Julius Beltram, who's one of the producers, was doing the scratch track, which he has a very proper voice. And I think he was secretly hoping, you know, the whole time everything would fall apart and he would end up being the voiceover. But, you know, Orion and I talked a lot about who we would think about to do the narration. And, you know, at one point I was, you know, talking to Jarvis Cocker, people like that. But then Orion said this to me one day. He said, you know, shouldn't be a musician, you know, because we shouldn't be another musician talking about a musician. It's kind of, strangely giving a stamp of approval. And and all of a sudden it made perfect sense. And so then Orion emailed me a list of different actors that he could get in touch with. And I went on YouTube and watched a bunch of interviews with them and closed my eyes and just listened to their voice.
It's a smart approach.
Yeah. And there was a really bad interview with Jason with some morning shows. Terrible interview. It was just
with the voice. But yeah, the voice.
But I just was listening to him, how he was talking.
Yeah.
He's fantastic.
It works beautifully in your film.
Yeah.
So talk to us a little bit about Barrett's infusion of not just fantasy and science fiction and the supernatural and the surreal, but also his 19th century Englishness in terms of how he brought all of these different disparate things together as a thoughtful writer and made these profound connections between nature and the universe.
I think, you know, in some ways, when Roger talks about the curiosity of him, you know, I think he was able to pull in all those things, you know, like the I Ching, using that as the basis, you know, for the lyrics of the song, or Golden Hair, or the Joyce thing. I mean, it's just like, I think he was just pulling in almost like a painter in respect. I mean, Graham Coxon once in some interview was describing Syd Barrett, and I always thought it was great. He said, oh yeah, his guitar playing was like sonic paintbrushes. So I think in some ways that's what made him different as a songwriter. You know, there's tons of stuff in the books where they trace every reference, you know, to Wind in the Willows and, all the childhood stuff, which he was pulling from all those things. But I think he was, I think he liked the sound of language and was able to pull stuff from all over the place. There's a friend of mine who's a poet that we interviewed that didn't make it into the film, but he talked about that because I thought that was interesting, because my friend does found poetry.
Okay.
And so at one point I thought there would be a sequence on that. But so I think, along what you're saying, I think he was pulling stuff from all over the place. And I think that's why I think a lot of musicians, contemporary musicians, still really love Syd's music and still really get a lot out of it. They see kind of the playfulness and the sound, the sound of the words, almost like poet. I have a friend that told me she became a poet because of listening to Madcap Laughs.
Wow.
She's a very successful poet. And I was like, really? like listening to Madcap Laughs in college.
It's almost like if Lewis Carroll had, started a rock band, really. He had that sensibility. And he was a real experimenter. He was like a great experimenter. And, is it that maybe one of the theories that I think your film explores is that the band really wanted to become a successful pop group, but he wanted to continue to be this sort of great experimenter? That's one of the reasons possibly for the fission?
I think so. I mean, I think, there's stories. And, in working on the movie, doing research, I bought, CDs of AMM, this band that was around, started listening to the Soft Machine and all these groups that were around. And a lot of them were doing a lot of improvisational stuff, and certainly you know, when I, you know, as I was flying to LA to see Orion and Pete Townsend, you know, I started remembering, you know, oh yeah, Pete was in art school, and all the auto-destructive stuff around noise, and, you know, it made perfect sense in some weird way, you know, that the Who was doing these 2-minute 50 pop songs with all these noisy breaks in them, you know, and all this discordant stuff. So, you know, I think you're absolutely, you know, and working on the film, listening to his music through a different, you know, set of parameters that I did before, which was as a musician, you know, playing the songs or not being able to play the songs, but then listening to it through, you know, with thinking about editing and structure. We didn't use the songs chronologically in the film, so Karen and I were using them as kind of mood and tone. And I was completely blown away by the creativity, you know, by his guitar playing and his song structure in an entirely different way. And then I went, I get it. I get why these musicians see something in that. I get why John Frusciante, you know, see Emily play. I get why Chris Cornell loves to sing, you know, Baby Lemonade. I get Thurston Moore came to our screening in London. And I was like, oh, Sonic Youth. Oh, yeah. You guys detuned guitars too. Oh, yeah, that's right. So, yeah, it's pretty amazing how creative he was, you know, at that moment, even with all the experimentation that was happening. So I think that, you know, and Pink Floyd did do some weird experimental records after him. I mean, Atom Heart Mother is very weird, you know, and this, you know, this supposedly this household objects thing, but they, you know, they ended up incorporating the noise and the tape loops within, you know, Dark Side of the Moon. You know, they started bringing that stuff into that.
So the spirit of Sid kind of continued to guide them on some level. Let's take a look at the images that your distributor sent us, and maybe you can both speak to them as we go through. Obviously, this is the cover art, which is fantastic. So yeah, talk to us about this photo.
That's like a promo photo, and we use that in the moment of the film where, you know, it seems like timing wise, Sid starts having more and more pressure in the band. And you know, there's been a lot made about him being, you know, quote unquote, kind of out of it in a lot of photos. And I've kind of now, having looked at almost every photo, you know, I don't take those as proof of anything. That was one thing I came away with, because some of them he looks stoned and it looks like a bad photo of him, because in the same photo session he looks amazing. So, you know, so some of these shots where his eyes are a little bit, you know, kind of disengaged, you know, I think he might be wasted or whatever, just like it's a bad shot. But I kind of like his expression in that, and he's definitely playing in that next one.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Very playful. A great sense of like playful mischief or benevolent mischief, right?
Yeah. That photo session was in Ruskin Park by this photographer, Colin Prine. And there's photos in that session where he's doing cartwheels right before that.
No, that's not that one. Okay.
Yeah. But that's the same photo session. Yeah.
Yep. All these black and white ones. These are great.
Crazy flares.
I love this one.
Yeah.
This is all the same day?
That's the same photo session. Yeah. Yeah.
So handsome and cool.
Later on. Yeah.
I mean, he ignited a whole trend of fashion, I think, and hairstyle. I mean, certainly with this look, and, you know, and made it famous.
Yeah. Yeah. Roddy's trying to keep it alive.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great shot. I mean,
I love this photo. Yeah, it's
Orion and I are friendly with the clothing designer John Varvatos.
Oh, yeah.
And John did a book about rock musicians and fashion, and Sid's on the cover.
All right. Well, fittingly so.
Yeah. He said Sid was my number one fashion icon.
I love it.
That's the poster photo, right?
Yes. That's the image. That's a Hypnosis shot. So that shot.
Now, was it Mick, was it, or was it Storm?
No, this is Storm. It's either Storm or Poe shot this picture. And so that's Sid in Weatherby Mansions. And it's got it. I think this is post Floyd already, you know, and so it's got his paintings in the background. And that's a flat he shared with Dougie Fields, who's in the movie.
That's great.
But there's great poses in that one where he's sort of bending over backwards. He's got these great leather pants on, these kind of Morrison pants, no shoes. And that's the one where he famously painted the floor different colors, the floorboards.
Oh, right. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Well, those are cool. Thank you, guys. Barrett, the last performance with Pink Floyd, how did he get cut out? What went down? It seemed like a casual decision, informed by years of bad experiences with him and of not being able to help him.
Right? Is that what Andy says, Roddy? An astute, creative business decision?
Kind of cold and matter of fact, but it was informed by many years of frustration, right, on their part.
So, yeah, supposedly, they, this is some of the stories that were circulating, that Sid wasn't playing, or he was detuning his guitar when they were playing live and just not, playing the songs, playing the hits, which now speaking of Tom York, he didn't want to play Creep forever, right? Like that was, this refusal to sort of perform like that. And they brought in David Gilmour to try and be the kind of guitar player, that would do the stuff on stage. And they were a 5-piece, I think only for 3 shows, maybe, or 4 shows.
Yeah.
And then, as Orion knows, in a particularly English way, they just didn't pick him up going to one of the gigs. So it's like officially not kicking him out, but just like kind of, just fizzling out in some weird way.
Why bother? What did Nick say? He says, why bother?
Yeah.
Should we bother?
What was the relationship like between Sid and David during that experimental period when they brought him in as a 5-piece?
And the things that were written about was that it was tense, and there's some hearsay stories which I couldn't corroborate where Sid was saying this is my band or something like that. But there was nothing that anyone told us on camera that hinted at that. But I think essentially they thought they would keep him as a songwriter. Like when Brian Wilson did that for the Beach Boys for a certain amount of time. And David would play live. But it just, they just was like, well, we're done, let's go on. But, David helped produce his 2 solo records, which is like a year and a half later. So,
the Madcap Laughs.
Madcap Laughs and Barrett. Yeah.
Yeah. It got out. So after Barrett left the band, his inaugural solo effort sort of began on a very rough footing, right? I mean, it had a tough start, and his friends and former bandmates really helped him try to get through it, which I found very moving.
Yeah, I mean, Roger and David, I think, stepped in to finish up the recording of Madcap Laughs and doing that, and so they, and they played on some of it. I think David played bass, maybe on Madcap Laughs, or Barrett for sure. So yeah, they helped him get, I mean, and this is the thing, he put out 2 solo records in 1 year, so it wasn't like he wasn't at that point not prolific. He was he was actually still had quite a few songs in him, which is interesting, to put out 2 records. I mean, I can't think of any musician that did that, like you leave your band and then all of a sudden come out with 2 albums in the same year. But I think a lot of it is too because of the snippets in between the songs, where Sid's talking and stuff like that. People, it creates a narrative that it was like kind of hard recording or things like that. But but the songs are beautiful. They are songs forever. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was a very beautiful and generous thing that they did to help him get these albums into the world. The title of your film, Have You Got It Yet? It was originally a song, right? We should talk about that.
Yeah, that was one of the mythological stories that we wanted to prove or disprove, but Nick proved it. He told the story, and basically when Sid kind of knew he was going to get booted from the band, he came to a rehearsal and said, I've written a new song. It's called Have You Got It Yet? And so the chorus was Have You Got It Yet? And then the rest of the band had to yell out, no.
That's great.
And as he was teaching them a song, he would change it every single time so they could never play it essentially. And so the story was that after a while, they realized he was completely taking the piss out of them, and they just it just stopped. But so, I mean, for us, the title was also this idea that, do you have his life? Do you have you got it in terms of like you were saying, his mischievousness or the mystery? And that was the other idea around the open-endedness of it. Like, we won't get it, we won't completely get it. We can get parts of it.
Keep it an enigma, right?
Yeah.
We'll be taking questions shortly for Orion and Roddy, so please start sending them in. But in the meantime, I still have a couple of my own. So Shine On You, Crazy Diamond was written as a tribute to Sid. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Talk to us a little bit about that.
Well, I think, that's one of the other interesting things about Sid's story, that he becomes more and more of a cult figure and a recluse, quote unquote, while Pink Floyd becomes one of the biggest bands in the world. And a lot of their music is sort of writing about Sid. I think there's parts of The Wall. I mean, there are parts of The Wall written about him, but I think before that, Dark Side of the Moon, there's that line in the, I think it's in Eclipse, if your band begins to play a different tune, right? I think they were thinking about Sid, and writing some of the most beautiful music, I think, almost like elegies to him. Mm-hmm. And Wish You Were Here, for sure. Shine On You, Crazy Diamond is all about Sid, and Wish You Were Here, this idea of absence. Storm talked about that, the absence of, Sid's character. The band was kind of trying to figure out what to do after Dark Side of the Moon, so they kind of weren't quite together. But they end up writing this beautiful music about him, that's quite powerful. I mean, when we sit in the theater and we hear that opening guitar, 3 notes, it's like, whoa, it's still goosebumps. It's pretty amazing.
My best friend in the world from childhood, since childhood, is a huge Pink Floyd fan. And he had recounted this story to me a while back. And then I saw it explored in your film, and it always gets me right in the heart. At one point, 6 years after Barrett was put out of the band, he came to the studio to record with Pink Floyd, but they didn't necessarily know it was him. He was kind of unrecognizable because he had kind of gone through it, and talk to us about that moment. As you explored in your film, and how poignant it was.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably one of the biggest mythological stories about Sid. Uncanny story, that in fact was true, because we heard it from the band members, and then also these new photos that Phil Taylor allowed us to use, which shows him and Roger at the at the console, right, listening to the playback. But the story was that Sid went to the Hipgnosis studio to look for Storm. That was the story that I had heard initially. And then they said, Storm's at Abbey Road, Pink Floyd's doing the new record. And so he just showed up there, and it just so happens they're working on that song. So that's the crazy element to the thing, that is one of those uncanny moments. And he had changed physically, so they didn't recognize him at first, and so then as it plays out in the film, they slowly figured out who it was, and had a very emotional response to that. But it's true. That's one of the true stories.
Yes, one of the true ones. Wow.
Kind of amazing.
It is. So a question has come in already. Thank you for a great program. I wanted to know what you thought of the latest Beatles song, Now and Then. How much of an influence did the Beatles have on Pink Floyd?
Have you heard that yet, Orion? I haven't heard it yet. I just read about it.
I have heard it. I heard it before it was released, and I actually was kind of enjoying the process of that song coming out, and the idea of it, just because so many bands pay homage to their heroes that they were in partner with or in a band, and I think that's just a nice tribute. And I mean, it's all timing, for whatever is going on. I mean, those guys Ringo and Paul are getting up in age, and maybe this is something to that they wanted to add to their repertoire of wonderful, incredible hits. I did like it though, better than I expected, for sure. I know that there was a few other tracks that they did with Anthology, Free as a Bird, and then they did the video and some other stuff. So just to being able to see what they've done with it is great.
Yeah.
I think that and Roddy, it seems like I wouldn't say a theme, but in 2 moments in the film, someone says something about John Lennon.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And we remember the theater we screened our film at Picture House in Cambridge.
Yeah.
And Jenny Spires was there to answer Liz's question directly. And Jenny said, this is where Sid saw the Beatles. So the Beatles played at, in this theater where we screened the movie, however many years later. So, of course, and the Beatles, the other famous story is the Beatles were recording Sgt. Pepper at Abbey Road at the same time that Pink Floyd was doing Piper at the Gates of Dawn. And so McCartney and Lennon would come in and hang out with them. So I think there was a little bit of cross-pollination that was happening.
Okay. Thank you for this great program, guys. Do you see Sid as a Van Gogh type figure? Does mental illness go hand in hand with great art?
Oh, God. I hope not.
At least not exclusively, right?
I took my mom to see the film in Jackson, Mississippi, and she brought a couple of her friends who were in their early 80s. And one of the ladies, her name is Jill, she looks over at me and she's like, Orion, I can't believe that I love this film. And I go, well, I'm glad you came. She goes, no, it's like my new favorite film. It's like Van Gogh. And within a minute, the quote about Sid is Van Gogh or whatever came up on the film, and she's like, see, I told you, and I was like, wow, they're really connecting to the subject matter that they know nothing about, which was pretty impressive.
It's a human story. It's a human story, and it's really universal, I think, and timeless, right?
What was the other half?
Yeah, I think I was just going to say in some ways, maybe the honesty and the laid bareness of it, might correlate between Sid and Van Gogh. Certainly that the solo records feel like that, like the tormented self-portraits,
Yeah.
There's a bit of that. I hope it's not exclusive though. I think you're right, Brian.
Yeah, let's hope not, right?
Ian Curtis, had a little bit of that mental illness going on, and certainly as well as Fukasi, the film I'm making about the Japanese photographer. That was a big part of them. Not all people who have that horrible thing that happens to them are artists, but not all artists have something. But something happens. Something unique takes them to another level. And it could be a lost love. It could be, being an only child or being with a bunch of kids. It could be so many things. And your environment certainly is an element of how music comes to life through bands.
Another really great aspect of your film, though, is that it really does explore the relationship between mental illness and creativity. And there's that great Jung quote, a breakdown being a kind of breakthrough. This idea that not everything bad has to always be bad. That something beautiful can come out of it as well. In the film, it appears Sid has little money. Is it true that the band at David's urging that Sid got paid?
Yes. They always made sure that Sid had some tracks on every Pink Floyd compilation. So he was taken care of financially, throughout his life. He lost some money, I think, when he blew his money, at a certain point. But they always, made sure that he had royalty streams from the Pink Floyd stuff.
What is your favorite Sid era Pink Floyd song? Mine is Bike.
That's a good question. I like Effervescing Elephant a lot. Maybe like similar to Bike. I like the Gnome, which is a very peculiar song. Andrew Van Woodgarden and I started trying to. We actually talked about that same question, Andrew, from MGMT. We were like, "What song do you like?" And he said, "I like that song that goes." It was the gnome. I said, "Oh, you mean the gnome?" And he's like, "Oh, yeah, no."
That one.
So it's pretty funny.
It's great.
Mine is I like seeing Emily play just because I love that moment in the film of how the whole film kind of comes through that moment, and you see a transition, and you see them sort of playing their hearts out. And I don't know, the way that you edited it, Roddy, is just something about that moment. I love it. I love it so much.
So what is next for the both of you in terms of projects?
For me, I'm doing this film in Japan about Masahisa Fukasi, the Japanese photographer who passed away many years ago. It's called Ravens. I'm working on a Billy Idol documentary, which is kind of cool.
The Jeff Buckley project, right? That's going to be a narrative?
It will be a narrative, scripted, and it's a feature. And I've been working on it since 2009, and it just takes a long time.
It takes a long time. I get it. I know but these are all worth it. It's all worth it.
But Roddy and I are, still talking about some stuff, but I know he has his own things.
Yeah, Roddy, what are you up to next?
Yeah, I'm not sure yet. I've got like 5 things kicking around. I mean, sadly, I'm in the same boat in some way to see which one picks up the most heat. I mean, we'll see. I mean, this film's doing very well, and it seems to have long legs on it. It's been playing theatrically since July, which is just kind of amazing.
It's a very long run. Do you know yet about streaming? When and where? And
it'll stream. We have not made a deal with streaming yet, but there's also going to be a Blu-ray in spring. We've been doing the Blu-ray extras for that, so it'll come out, on all those formats. But it's been, just played in. It's playing in Barcelona, I think, in a day or so. It's sold out those screenings.
Fantastic.
So it's been kind of amazing.
Oh, and of course, we should say that you can all watch it for free until November 6th, which I believe is Monday, through the Queens Public Library. And the link is in the comments section of this interview. So be sure to take advantage of that and watch the film, because it really is fantastic. And I think even if you're not a Pink Floyd fan, you'll be deeply moved by it. And so, Roddy and Orion, thank you both so much for this. And thank you, everybody, for watching. And have a great weekend. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.